Should we try that again? It is the last session, but please bear with us. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. That was absolutely heartfelt. Welcome to the final formal session of the day. A big thanks to Doug and the team for having organised today. And thanks indeed to the panel who are sharing the graveyard shift with me. I have Ben from Temasek organisation, we have Mary from British Council, and we have Amitav from the ARC Foundation country director from India. And the session we're going to be talking about, obviously, is engaging governments, and we're going to be covering a number of areas of that, looking at what works, as Doug said this morning, importantly, what doesn't work, and what is replicable and what is relevant across borders. So we won't be going into too much specific country detail and specific country-led interventions. I'm sure if anybody would like to catch up with us afterwards, we're more than happy to do that. In terms of process, I will shut up as soon as possible, and we will listen to our three esteemed guests who will be taking you through. But the idea of today is all about you. These sessions only really work if you get out of them what you want. So in a break with tradition, what we will do is we will be talking. As soon as you have a question, please come and stand up at the mics. We won't necessarily take the questions until we finish speaking, but the important thing is for us is to judge how many questions there are out there in the audience. Because the last thing we want to do is be sitting here talking for 45 minutes and then completely run out of time for questions. So as soon as you hear, or as soon as you have something going in your head, whether it's a specific question to one of us or whether it's a more generic question, please do come to the microphones and we will adjust our pace accordingly. Now, is that all okay? That's not too complicated for 5:19 on a Wednesday afternoon, is it? No, Jonathan. Okay, so as I said, thanks very much to Doug for bringing us here. And when I say thanks, that is thanks which is qualified in a couple of ways. First of all, as I discovered on arrival on Sunday, it's 30 degrees, or it's over 30 degrees in terms of temperature. It's also over 80% in terms of humidity. Believe it or not, I am over 40 years old, and a fact that you will believe is that I'm overweight. And being British, I don't do smart casual. So it's been thanks, but actually, health-wise, it's not been a particularly pleasant 3 days. The fact that I'm here, you're quite lucky with. The second thing in terms of qualification, in terms of thanks, was actually when Doug got up this morning with the very inspirational words about rejecting the word can't, embracing urgency, driving system change. And then I looked at the title of this session, Engaging Governments. Oh dear, was my initial feeling. And it resounded very clearly with a session I was sitting in England as my role as CEO, with an election coming up in the UK in just under a year's time. I got to spend 8 hours of my life listening to the two prospective ministers in the UK talking about social investment. And I must admit, at the end of that session, or during that session, probably before that session, I sat there thinking, is this 8 hours of my life that is going to make any difference whatsoever? And I started getting quite frustrated about it. And I don't know whether that's because I'm an ex-trader, so I have an attention span of a gnat. For me, long-term decisions is about a day. So perhaps I'm not attuned into it. But I was struggling to see the relevance, and I've already heard today quotes from Muhammad Yunus, from Mandela, from Gandhi, from Jed Emerson. Don't tell him I mentioned him in the same breath, please. And I thought I'd like to take it to a new intellectual level by paraphrasing badly Monty Python. I was sitting there in this session thinking, actually, what has government done for me? What has government done for me in the UK? And then I actually wrote it down. If it hadn't been for Michael Norton, wherever Michael Norton is in here, and lobbying of government, we wouldn't have had a £100 million endowment made by the government to create the organisation that is Unlimited, which the UK and globally has got an awful lot to thank Michael and, in particular, Cliff for. we wouldn't have had a lot of the work behind social finance and the social impact bonds, which are being taken on and I think will be accelerated by international development, far beyond the initial thinking of Ronnie Kang and the social finance team. We also have a $1 billion, sounds much better in dollars, a $1 billion wholesale social investment fund, the Big Society Capital, again, a creation of the government. We have social incubator funds. We now have a social investment tax relief about to hit the streets. Please contain your excitement. We have the G8 Social Investment Task Force, which is also terribly exciting, but we'll be reporting back at the end of June. And the program that actually I'm most proud of in this sector is the Investment and Contract Readiness Fund, which is a fund we run in the UK. It's a technical assistance fund to help people get investment ready. It is as unsexy in its title as it is in its delivery, but it's crucially important. And without government, that would never have happened. And it's sort of stimulated £1 of investment being turned into £35 worth of investment across the board. So it's been critically important. So my gut reaction of, actually, is government that important? I suppose the sad conclusion that I came to is that it is. And speaking on a personal level, I'm probably finding engaging with government the most frustrating and time-consuming part of my job. But actually, on sober reflection, it's probably the most impactful part of what I can do. It feels frustrating because it's a long way away from the frontline charity organizations in terms of delivering the impact that I get out of bed to try and achieve. So it feels quite a long way from that. But it is the only way we are going to achieve scale and systemic change. So for me, it's frustration, but again, the most important thing that I do. How about you, Ben?
Wow. Welcome to Singapore and to our nice weather. For those of you who saw me last year, I was sitting there. So this year, by cruel intentions of Andrew, I'm sitting here. So I'm supposed to give content now, not just facilitate. So I'll share something about what I do, and I can echo some of your sentiments. Temasek Foundation, many of you know the name Temasek, especially those in Asia. We were set up by Temasek in 2007 to contribute to human and social capital development. Our main thesis is this: if you have strong institutions led by capable leaders with the right connections with each other and across boundaries, that is a formula for us that leads to development. So our main programs are capacity building programs, train-the-trainer programs, multiplier type programs in education, healthcare, public policy, public administration, city management, and the like. I work with governments a lot. My team and I engage government departments for the very reasons that Jonathan has mentioned: scale and systemic improvements. We engage the Ministry of Education in Indonesia, the Ministry for Labor in Vietnam, and so on. And the idea is that if you get the leaders, you get the top leaders, government leaders involved and engaged, a few things happen. One, you get the right signaling. Because in Asia, I don't know whether it applies everywhere else, but definitely in Asia, the people in the hierarchy below the ministers and the secretary generals take the cue from the top. So if you get the top leaders involved, you get the right signaling. Two, these very same leaders, these governments, can mobilize their own resources to engage in some counterpart funding to our programs. So while we provide resourcing, they also provide some counterpart funding. Three, they are the ones who are going to lead and implement the projects and the programs. They identify needs, they take charge of the program after that. So really engaging governments is a necessity for us, because we feel that only through working with governments that you can achieve the changes that we want to achieve. Oh, sorry, I'm going to rephrase that: to achieve the changes that they want to achieve, not we. Okay, we are just a facilitator as a foundation. But as much as we need their support and their contributions, there are challenges we face every day, and as we engage governments. urgency or lack thereof. Maybe to a certain extent, breaking of promises. We've encountered programs where they promise to mobilize maybe 50 participants for a program, and they only they end up sending only 25. And we have already amassed all these resources to follow through on the program. So breaking of promises. Expectations of further support. There are programs where we have not even gone through halfway the first program, and the officials are asking for a second program for support, for engagement, for partnership. So there are challenges, but the good news for us is that there are also not just moments or trinkets, but actually a lot of sweet spots, a lot of high moments for us where we see the officials take the lead and multiply the learning in our programs through the system. For example, in one country, we had a program for master teachers in English, and these master teachers went on to train 50 more. Each master teacher went on to train 50 more in the system. They changed their curriculum, they changed their pedagogy, and now the whole of their system, the education system on teaching English follows the program that they participated in. So there are many, many of these sweet spots. I'll stop here because leave more time open for questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. And just a reminder to people, please do not be shy. There are 4 microphones. We will keep you waiting till we've gone around the panel.
No, not now.
So no, but please wait there. Marcus. We just want to gauge how many people have got questions. So I know I have one question from the shy and retiring Marcus sitting in the front line. I would like to move over to Murray, Doctor of Economic Development and Global Head of Social Enterprise for the British Council. So no pressure there.
So I'm on a stage with a bunch of comedians, no pressure. It seems so. So my name is Mary. I work for the British Council based in Beijing and run our growing global programme. So the British Council has been running social enterprise programmes for the past 5 years, which originated in Beijing and Indonesia and have most rapidly developed across East Asia, but are now growing globally. And in terms of engaging with governments, there's probably sort of 3 points I would make briefly to kick things off, which map quite neatly and unplanned onto the points that Doug made this morning. So the first one is that a lot of the work that we are doing with governments, particularly across East Asia, but not limited to that, is around this issue or this point that there is an urgency around inclusive economic development, and that's really gaining momentum at the moment. So whether that's coming from government itself or from international development agencies in countries like Myanmar, where responsible business and civil society issues are sort of converging, there are opportunities for us to talk about social enterprise and social investment that probably didn't exist to the same extent 2 to 3 years ago even. So there is a real opportunity there, and certainly from the British Council's point of view, in terms of the work that we're doing, we can look at different countries and engage with the partners that we are working with in those countries and really think about, how do we take this whole dialogue of social enterprise and make some decisions about the smart points of intervention. Is that a study tour back to the UK? Is that a capacity building programme? If so, is it with social entrepreneurs? Is it with government? So there are lots of opportunities really to be quite systemic in the way that we think about that. The second point is around collaborating and collaborating for impact. So to the point of systems change, I just think that that's hugely, hugely important. And for the British Council, everything that we are doing is in partnership. And so from that perspective, we're in quite a luxurious position because we get to work with a number of partners across the UK and many partners in the different countries where we're operating. So we operate in over 100 countries across the world. So the opportunity to scale and to be systemic and to really think about the kinds of programs that we are delivering and the partners that we work with it is almost endless, and that's presenting us with many opportunities. For me, that really is at the heart of what we need to be doing is thinking increasingly about how we really can be creative about scale and systems change. And the very final point, I think, relates to the issue about can't and opportunity, and that's something about leadership. And again, perhaps I'm in a more luxurious position than Jonathan insofar as I get to talk about UK leadership in a very optimistic and positive way most of the time. You know, we are talking to governments across the world about the exciting things that the UK has done. So I don't have to sit in 8-hour meetings in the UK very often and suffer through some of the more painful aspects of that. It's definitely a dance engaging with government. But I think that that's part of the responsibility we all have, is to make a decision that we are going to be quite positive about appreciating the fact that we're not going to create systems change without engaging with government. And so how are we going to do that? Which partners do we need? Which messages do we need? How can we not get caught up in the vocabulary and the rights and wrongs of, you know, whether we come at it from this perspective or this perspective, and just find ways to really create traction and to lead.
Lovely, Murray, thank you very much indeed. And language is one of the issues that has come up in both of the sessions that I was sitting in earlier on, in terms of the language between investors and investees or beneficiaries, and also the language of government is very important in terms of actually making it relevant for all the three parties and listening to what actually can be done rather than trying to push stuff through. Amitav, your country director of the ARC Foundation in India. You've been private sector, public sector, now charity sector. Working in arguably what's from the outside looks to be one of the most bureaucratic in government environments.
So let me just start by giving you a little introduction about ARC and the work we do. We're a UK-based charity, been in existence for the last 12 years, set up by a group of hedge fund managers who decided to give back. And we focus primarily on 3 areas: child protection, education, and health. And about 6 years ago, we decided to enter India because, of course, of the unmet need, but specifically decided to focus on education just because of the challenges that the country faces. So over the last 6 years, we've done a fair amount of work in, but I should say, at the outset say that we're an organization that believes that it's a catalyst. It's not a service provider. Our objective is to run programs at scale, at a reasonable scale. I think scale is relative, depending on which country and which state you're working in. But the objective is to be a catalyst and to showcase at a fairly large scale a pilot that works. And then have either other partners, service providers, or governments scale those programs. So that's the nature of the work we've done, and we've done work in leadership capacity development within schools. We've done teacher training across 500 schools in 9 states, working with 20,000 kids. We've worked with governments specifically to define what quality standards in education look like, kind of the Ofsted model of the UK. Most of you are familiar with that. So that's the nature of the work. I just want to say 2 things. I actually want to share a story, a very interesting story that happened 3 years ago when we worked with a very large state, Madhya Pradesh, which is now the largest state in India, with a population of in excess of 100 million people. When we went out to work with that state, we were actually given a proposal by the then commissioner who ran 120,000 schools. That was his responsibility, to manage 120,000 schools in the state. And he gave us a 2-page proposal on setting up quality standards to assess and evaluate school quality. Now, this was fantastic because this was exactly up our alley. We had relationships with Ofsted in the UK. We knew what he was talking about. We loved the concept. So we went back and we worked on a proposal to try and get an evaluation framework in place to evaluate 120,000 schools. And 3 months later, we went back with that proposal. Fortunately, we got funding from the UK government through DFID to support that, because there was an involvement from UK's perspective in this as well. So it was great. So it was sort of a tripartite relationship. And we went back 3 months later with the proposal in hand, presented it to the commissioner, and he loved the idea. So he said, let's get going, let's sign a contract, and have ARC come in and be the nodal agency that will set up a consortium. 3 months later, we came back, we found partners to work with, so on and so forth. The commissioner was gone. He was no longer there. Replaced by somebody who came from the Ministry of Labor and saw what we were proposing to do, had this 200-page document with a contract and all the concession agreements written up and so on and so forth. Didn't like what we were proposing. So he said, I don't like this, it doesn't make sense for me, I can't do it. So back to ground one. To cut a long story short, it took us 2.5 years before which that proposal got accepted. 4 commissioners changed. We finally got one that saw value in this, signed the contract and moved forward. So that's just one story to tell you the frustrations, but the reward of working through that frustration is so high that there's value in sticking in it. So I'll just stop with that story and maybe share some more when we come back.
Great. Well, I know there's a lot more stories and anecdotes that we have up on the stage, but are there any particular starting questions? Marcus, you were first off the block. I have some other questions that I will put to you guys, but Marcus.
Very short question. It was in nearly all panels I have joined today. There was the first question, who is from which sector? Civil society, from a foundation, from an enterprise. I would like the same question now. Who is working in this room, full staff, employed by the public administration or a government? That was a question I wanted to make because it's a big point. I'm since 6 years a parliamentarian in my town, and all I have learned about that was the real learning first, understanding government, which is, I think, something which we should take in consideration. If we develop, as foundation or social investors, programs, how, and that might be my question to the panel, how we can engage them from the very early beginning to developing our programs, because this is something which I have learned. To make this very short, when I first time came out from my foundation world to my steering committee, my political committee in our town, and it was about civil society and how can we promote that. It was a meeting, it went 3 hours, and it was about a budget of 5,000 euro for the 30 NGOs or civil society we had in our town. And I was shocked. It was about giving them for a year 200 euro or 250. And I, coming from a world where I decide very quickly, around 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, I can decide very quickly in one day. So it's much about that, and what can we do to also invite much more people from this field. I just coming from Istanbul, where I did a forum with a lot of people from municipalities, and they have been so happy to be invited to groups like this. That's just the point.
Thank you very much. So in terms of how is it easier, how can people engage with government earlier stage? Mari, can I throw this at you?
I don't know that there's one answer. My answer, I essentially worked for a government organisation for a long time, and yeah, there's definitely a different way of engaging and positioning and and dealing with particular agendas. So I don't think it's about delivering programs in a way which plays only to that agenda. I think it's about understanding that there are different agendas, which, to be honest, is something that, whether you're talking about government investors or beneficiaries, or this whole sector is defined by the fact that it's much more about convergence, much more about collaboration, and much more about being able to tell stories about value to lots of different stakeholders. So to me, the government piece is one piece, and it's about understanding who you need to have on your team, and it's also about relationship building. So you need to know who the individuals are, the particular individuals who happen to have a stake at any given point in time and what they need, and how you can tell the story of what you're looking to do in a way which is going to deliver to government as much as it's going to deliver to your investors or other individuals that need to be satisfied short term. And the other point, just going back to something that was said this morning that I absolutely think is quite fundamental in all of this, is that there is a huge need and opportunity to be much, much more creative about the way that we tell collective impact stories. And there is a sense, I think, that when we start talking about government, that we need to default to doing things in a way that we assume it needs to be done. So it needs to be dry, it needs to be reports, it needs to be, and there is an element of that, but there's also a huge opportunity to design and deliver stories, videos, and in very creative ways of demonstrating value that I think increasingly governments are going to want, because they also need to see how they need the opportunity to change.
Amitav.
I just want to add to that, just continuing on my story. I think it's also very important while engaging government, to engage all levels of government. And I think that's where we make a big mistake. That we talk to the commissioner, we talk to the director. And that is a fundamental flaw, because they're not the ones writing the contract. They're not the ones signing the concession agreements. If you are unable to sell a message all the way down, even to the person whose job it isn't, at some point in time, this is not going to work. And that's the experience we had, where we were not engaging with all levels of government. When we got to the point when we were actually farming out schools for evaluation, there was a question asked as to why are we doing this? This is costing the government money, but we don't understand why we're doing it. So I think it's important for everyone within the system to have that aha moment when you're signing something, to say, I get it. I know why I need to do it. And we learned the hard way, but that's just another important thing, is to engage all levels of government.
And yeah, and just one more point stimulated by that is that part of what the British Council has been able to do is invite participation from government organisations in the UK and beyond. And sometimes, if you start from the position of convincing, it is kind of not the right place to start. If you invite people to participate and to see what you're doing, then that opens eyes, doors, and people come back and want to engage in a different way.
And in the conversation about stories, we asked both the existing minister in the UK and his opposition, what can they get what we're trying to do? So there's no point in trying to lobby them about understanding what we're trying to do. So we asked them what could strengthen their voice within government, and stories. It kept coming back to stories. Help them describe through all different tiers of government with anecdotes of actually what they mean in practice. And when you start doing that, you actually start winning the hearts and minds, and then you can get into the drier stuff. But it's very important not to lose that. Gentleman at the back.
Thank you. My name's John Godfrey. I'm a traditional philanthropic fundraising consultant. So as I listen to this, first of all, I'm blessed. It's a long time since I've had to deal with government. I have, but it was a long time ago. I'm listening to all the complexity. I'm listening to Amitav talk about having to engage in multiple layers. I'm listening to all the other subtexts about the subtleties and I guess essentially the effort required to engage with government and get support and resources from government. I'm kind of wondering, I'm interested to hear not only from you but from other people in the room, how do you assess your own return on investment? Or to put it bluntly, is it all going to be worth it? It's a lot of work, it seems to me, compared to the world that I mostly work in, where very often we're dealing with individuals or maybe corporations, but their agenda and the personnel with whom you're dealing are reasonably definable, and the relationships you build are enduring in the main. So before I engage with government, what sort of a conversation do I need to have with myself to work out whether all the work is worth the candle?
I thought the session on return on investment was just a few hours ago. Okay. For us in the Temasek Foundation, we decided from the very beginning that we wanted to make the effort. And I guess it's a sort of leap of faith thing, where you say to yourself, look, if you want it to ripple through the whole system, then you need to engage government at some point. We tried a few programs with NGOs. They're good success, less effort, but the impact was localized. Maybe one small area, one small cluster of schools, one or two hospitals. So we went further and said, no, we need to do a little bit more than that. Yes, it's very painful. It can be very painful, but there are, as I said, also many sweet spots. And just to add on to what my fellow panelists have said, in Asia, I don't know whether, again, it happens in other countries. I'm very sure it does. Two words actually happen a lot. One of them is trust. When we started engaging governments, some were friendly to us, some saw us as a source of resources, cash, money. Some were genuinely appreciative that we engaged them. But the whole process that we approached was, look, this is not our doing, this is not our program, this is yours. We want to just be a part of what you are doing to improve your education system, your healthcare system, and so on. So we let them take ownership from the beginning, and we built trust along the way. So much so that today, they're asking for more and more programs, not just because of the extra money, but also because they trust us. The second word that's operative in Asia is face. I don't know whether you understand that. So whatever we do, we mustn't make them look bad. Many a time, and I don't know whether that happens in some of the, those of you who are in foundations, where you have solutions and you have ideas and you have a whole panel of experts behind you that you are also your potential partners, and you come along with solutions, and you go to the Secretary General in charge of education and you say, you need this. Thank goodness we did not do that. We said, no, this is not the way to do it. You can't do that. You just cannot go, and then in the Asian context, you can't go and say, you need this or you need that. Hear them out, listen to them, get them to articulate what they actually need. Sometimes they want to jump 3 steps. Then the experts come in and say, hey, maybe you take 1 step at a time and see the progress. So face is also important. Government is as much about face as about policy. In Asia, anyway, don't let them lose face.
Would anybody else like to add to that? I'm just going to very quickly, despite my opening preamble, please take it from me that I think it is worth every inch of paying. The social investment tax relief, the social investment marketplace has been banging its head trying to get mainstream investment, looking at coming into social investment alongside the foundations and money that's already there. The social investment tax relief gives us a mainstream reason to speak to wealth managers. That sort of lever we cannot pull without government. And yes, it was hard work getting it through Treasury. Yes, it was predominantly a Cabinet Office initiative, so we had to get it through the financiers. But it was absolutely worth it. And there are certain key wins like that are structurally changing, that just cannot be done from the outside. And I think the difficulty is finding the language and getting us quickly to the point where you use the language and you find the mutual benefits that actually makes sense for it to push. Because what we have found is when we found, talking to the civil servants, when we find a way of actually translating what we have into something that is useful to them politically, things move very fast indeed, but it might take a while to get there. Would anybody else like to add? Mary?
Yeah, just very briefly as an example of that, the announcements that David Cameron made at the G8 task force around social investment and the UK leading the development of a global social investment market allowed us to just, very, very quickly have a level of dialogue in a number of countries across East Asia. Beyond that, around social investment, and really elevate the programme. And last year we launched in China a social investment platform, which very quickly was able to mobilise £1 million into 12 winning social enterprises. So that kind of capacity to just move programmes and scale things does depend on government support, I think.
Right. I'll take all 3 questions all in one go, just in case that there's any synergies between them. Gentleman here.
Thank you. I'm Casey Chiu. I wear several hats. I'm here as the chairman of the Substation and Arts Organization, but I have also been the chief fundraiser for the 2 universities in Singapore, NUS and NTU. And this is more a comment, if I may. So I'm very pleased to see this topic engaging governments, because I believe greatly. But there are governments and there are governments. They're all different, especially in the field of funding philanthropies. So in the Singapore government's case, it's an especially spectacular example of what is good to do. and it perhaps is not sufficiently acknowledged. Just very briefly, when you give to an IPC, a charity, you get a 250% tax deduction, 2.5 times. When you give to certain organizations, certainly the universities, you get a dollar for dollar matching. Actually, universities 1.5 to 1. Now, recently, when you give to cultural and arts organizations, you also get a dollar for dollar matching up to a cap of $200 million. It's not small change, it's very, very vital. There's a $4 billion fund set aside for universities for matching. This is just exemplary behavior, and I think that there has not been enough acknowledgement of pointing this out to the Singapore government is doing this. Because I think that just as we rank institutions, we should rank governments as to how helpful they are to the social service sector and to the philanthropic sector. And it strikes me that there's not a better organization to do this than, in fact, AVPN and AV and the European equivalent. That you should actually rank governments in terms of their practices. So that's one point. And it becomes a competition for them, and they want to look good. Governments always want to look good. This is what Benedict means when he talks about face. But the thing to also to remember is that just as in every other sector, it is the relationships that matter. And the experience of the panelists says that, you deal with one person and then he's gone. Well, that's the same thing for foundations. That's the same thing for, well, maybe not foundations because they're family sometimes. But you deal with individuals and you build relationships with individuals. And this is perhaps something which you need to understand when dealing with governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentleman at the back.
I'm not sure if it's a question or a general observation. I mean, when we refer to developing countries, isn't all about money? Because, I mean, the way the governments are approached by donors, either bilateral, multilateral, or big foundation, is all about power relation. And normally, governments are pushed and pulled by donors. So going back to what Amitabh was saying, actually, I try to see the other way around. From the government perspective, I've never seen in my life any secretary in any ministry in Nepal say no to a proposal, to a funding proposal coming from a donor. So I think it's very sensitive, the way we work with governments and the power that we have and the way we play with that.
Thank you very much indeed. Gentleman at the front.
Yes, I'm Alan Wang from Shanghai Be Better organization. We do economic citizenship education in China. My question is, when we talk about the engaging governments, there are usually the three results from the partnership with government. One is the government just neglect whatever we're doing, so just do by yourself. The second is the government may be supportive, supply funding or resources to work with us. The third results may be they take over whatever we're doing. They say it's a very good result, they take over whatever we're doing, so they do by themselves. But question is when the third scenario, the best scenario, the government take over whatever we try doing, we finish the pilot, we have the good practice, the government take over. But they just take over. They never say they never say it's work with us. They say it's done by themselves. So what we can do say? We do not have the solid proof to our donor say this is from our initiative. The government learn from us, but the government never say this. How can we do this? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the point about ranking governments. We have the question of donor power to actually help how we use that power. But on the last point, gentlemen, you two were nodding vigorously.
I can take the last point on the as I understand you, after the pilot program, the government takes over and possibly doesn't give credit to the original pilot and to the foundation or whoever that supported. My short answer is I'm okay. Why? It's not about me. It's not about Temasek Foundation. This is about the community that wants to do something for itself. If they want to continue engaging, well, okay. If you don't, and you think you can do it on your own, also okay. But what we found is many of them would like the panel of experts that we have amassed to visit them 2-3 years down the road after the pilot to see whether the changes have remained and to review the progress. Another program I can give an example of, we had a program on how to train civil servants, public policymakers in the concept of public-private partnerships. Who pays for what? Who owns what? You know, the legislation, the accounting. This country we had a project with, we had 2 parts of the program, training, consultancy, and then a follow-up advisory. After the training program, they went ahead to apply the concepts they learned to various projects that they were already working on. And after the consultants reviewed and said, you actually don't need the advisory part anymore. It saves us $500,000 Singapore dollars. And I said, wow, fantastic, thank you very much. I can use the money for some other programs. So I think, from my view, no problem. Let the community take ownership because that's where it should belong.
So just one, maybe to echo what Ben just said. When I was joining the sector from the corporate world 6 years ago, I actually happened to ask a mentor who worked in the social sector before I was joining how I should define success for myself. And his response to that was, you'll know you're successful the day you don't have a job. Right? So the idea is you're making yourself redundant, and that's how you're successful in the development sector. So back to your point about getting credit. The way we define success with government, especially when we work with governments, actually I should share another small story about this word you see at the top of the door. Can you just say it out aloud? Exit. I undermined the importance of this word, exit. Because when we went into getting in and working with government is the easy part. It's the getting out that's tough. Yes. And there are so many governments that don't realize that getting out and leaving this agency that came to catalyze a project or give you an idea or sell an intervention or introduce a program is not there in perpetuity. It's us who has to run the program. So defining exit soon after defining entry is more important. And we learned that again sort of the hard way. But it's not about getting credit. It's about actually getting the government to realize that 4 years or 5 years or 20 years later, it's you who's going to be doing this. You have to take the credit because it's your program and it's your influence and your impact. So as an organization, we don't want the credit, just to echo Ben's point.
Yeah, just to also address the point about power. I think someone raised the point about power. And that's precisely why I think generally most foundations will not do this. We will not go and offer solutions and with money and throw. There are foundations that do this for other reasons. But if you're really interested in development, the definition of the program, the definition of the need must come from the community and the leaders. It cannot come from us. And therefore, there's no power imbalance of sort because we are, in a way, a servant to the community, although we have the resources and we can decide whether it fits with our overall mandate, and so on. But at the end of the day, the community takes ownership. So the power is with them.
The one thing that I would just add from a UK perspective, we've got 2 more questions here, is that I'm quite happy for the Cabinet Office to take credit for the interventions that it's effectively seeded, because I want to give Cabinet Office as much ammunition as humanly possible to talk to other government departments. That's the most critical bit for me in terms of really hardwiring this in, because we have a Cabinet Office that's been very supportive. We've probably got the most enabled environment across the board in the UK, and still we moan about it. So it's actually how do we give them more ammunition? So for me, if the social investment business doesn't get the credit for some of the innovation on one of its funds, I can live with it as long as it's supporting the broader marketplace. And we have 2 questions here.
Hi, I'm Rajan. I'm an associate partner with Dalberg Global Development Advisors, a management consulting firm focused on social impact and development. Just want to share a couple of quick practical tips, but more to get more practical tips from you about working with governments. The first one comes from the experience of serving the Economic Development Board of a Middle Eastern country that I will not name, and you will know why once I share the anecdote. One of the challenges is this slow pace, etc., that everybody has spoken about. And the practical tip that we figured out after some time was that these governments work because there is somebody who's doing more than average work, as the rest of them do less than average work. And so the trick here was to spot that particular person. At first, we were trying to chase up the CEO, and he would give us long meetings and, and all of that. But nothing would happen until we found out that it was the COO of the Economic Development Board who really made things move. Essentially, at the partner level, we figured out the only way to get him was to wait by the elevator. Because this guy was doing so much more than the average share of work, was that you just couldn't get the guy. And so if you wanted to get something done, it was well worth the wait of even just sometimes just waiting until he takes a toilet break to walk with him and so on. And then we, of course, figured the other part of the equation, which is the face part of it, which is that meeting the CEO was also extremely important. And so we decided that we'd meet him in a place that he likes, which was the spa. So that was sort of one practical tip. The second one is in dealing with corruption, especially in emerging markets when dealing with governments. And in this one, essentially, what we found is to have a very frank conversation with the political leadership, saying that, listen, I mean, we totally understand there's a lot you need to do, you raise funds and you need to do, but you do also need to create impact, and here's how that'll work. You can use us for that, literally. We're kind of stupid, we don't do this for money, but you can use us for that. Now, with this as a preamble, what I would love is some practical tips of these kinds that you found in your experience, which help you to effectively kind of open doors, which effectively help you to turn the levers of impact, very practical stuff of how do you get this done.
Thank you. A great question. I will take a question from the gentleman just behind. And I am obliged, obviously, to take a question from our hosts. So we will get that, Andrew.
Sure. Well, mine is a very different point from his. But Amitabh, you talked about entry and exit and handing over programs back to government. Over the last couple of years that I've been in the social space in India, I've worked very closely with maybe 45 to 55 non-profit organizations. And pretty much all of them have this grand idea that we'll develop a program, we'll prove it works, and then we're going to hand it over to the government, and it's going to scale and change the world. There are a few problems I find with it, and therefore I question the fundamental assumption that you should be developing programs to hand over to government. Often the government doesn't want to be doing all these things that society has made them do, or political masters have decided to do in order to get votes in a democracy, right? They're not equipped to do it. They honestly often don't want to do it. And therefore, they don't do it and wait for the next transfer to get a better role and a better position. And the story goes on, what you experienced. The question I have is that why don't non-profits say that, look, we will develop the program, we will run the program, and the government should outsource its work to us in perpetuity. If in India you talked about economic activity or business in the 60s and 70s, the government would tell you, look, you can go home as an entrepreneur or a businessman. We will take care of everything in this country, right? And people still continue to have private business. So I don't know. I mean, has anyone had the experience of flipping this around and saying, instead of government trying to run things, and I've seen a lot of programs where the program is developed, very difficult to hand over, but you manage to somehow hand over, and then 3 years later, people have changed, priorities have changed, and you're back to square one because the people in government don't necessarily care, and the ones who care don't stay in their position or their role long enough for institutional change to really happen. So just a thought out there, why aren't non-profits saying, look guys, you regulate, you legislate, you collect the funds, then find who's the best service provider and let us provide the service on a 5-year, 10-year, 50-year, 20-year contract. And when we can't do the job, we find the next organization to deliver the service. Why are we trying to teach you things which honestly you don't even want to be doing sometimes? And letting all this good experience and funding over time often go to more or less waste.
Great, thank you very much. And I will just take a question from Andrew, who is the one person in the room who is allowed to do a sales pitch for his organization in asking his question. Andrew.
I wasn't even going to do one, Jonathan. I was actually going to give a perspective from pre-AVPN, where my experience was in managing charitable foundations and setting up venture philanthropy funds. I first of all wanted to pick up on a couple of comments from the panel and add to those or endorse those. And then a truism and a tip. I was going to respond to the tip question. So I'm not sure this is a question rather than a set of comments. The regular changes, I think that is frustrating. I think I pick up that point entirely. But what I would counter that with as the opportunity is that you're building a relationship through a very large organization. So done properly, I think, creates a bunch of ambassadors within government in time. Painful, but in time. So I think it's an opportunity rather than a threat. I totally agree with the all levels comment that was made that I think you've got to work right the way from top to bottom. I would contend that you avoid politicians like the plague, but I mean at civil government official levels right the way through. A truism, in my experience, and certainly in the experience I've had since joining AVPN, is that governments hire smart people. They take the brightest and the best from the best schools and from the best systems. They hire really bright. So I see that as a truism. And my tip, and I did it for 10 years, is get secondees in from government. Whether I couldn't conceive setting up a venture philanthropy organization or running a foundation set of programs without getting a government secondee onto the team. I think that creates a far greater link into the language and the translation required to work effectively with governments, if I may offer a tip. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Andrew. So in terms of questions, additional tips on top of secondees, stalking and spas? So anybody like to throw any stubs in there? And if anybody else has any tips, please think about it. We have a short amount of time for people to throw them in.
So I'll briefly respond to Ranjan's question about practical tips. What has worked with me is offering the commissioner very often my car and driver to go from office to meetings, which frees up his car for his wife to use. And then I chaperone him for meetings, and that's how we have our discussions. So that's one tip. The second one is on steering committee meetings. Typically, commissioners and directors will not know how to open a meeting, so they won't know what to say because they can't recall what's happened. So I write the speaking points for them. So that also works. Just on the outsourcing to NGOs, in another word, I guess I call that public-private partnership. And that, in a sense, if that's what you meant, because at least in the education sector, what we're doing is we've gone to government and we said, you can't run good schools, but you have the money to do it. Give us the schools, continue to pay, we'll run it. So in a sense, you are outsourcing to private non-profit operators to be able to do that. And just one comment that I did want to say, at least in the last 6 years that I've been working with government in India, is I fundamentally believe that government people are not bad. It's the systems that make them, underperform.
Perhaps one tip, and again, this is very Asian. Have a meal. Lunch or dinner or even drinks. Also, I think there are governments and there are governments. What I mean, I don't mean corrupt or non-corrupt. I mean there are different types of government. While Andrew suggests that we avoid politicians, you have to look at the country and the community you're in. and see where the authority is and how it works. For some countries, it's easy to work with the minister level because they will get things done, and they are there for a long time. I mean, look at Singapore. I hope this is not recorded. For some countries, the ministers come and go, and commissioners come and go. So you have to, right. But meals and drinking, off the meeting, off the boardroom conversations actually help a lot. That was, and I think because because I'm going to probably sum anyway, my part is, my only comment for the whole session is this. There's a moving paradigm, the paradigm is shifting, that in the old days, philanthropy and NGOs go in where the governments fail. Maybe we can look at it slightly differently and say, well, maybe governments are failing, but they recognize they need some support, some help, dare I say that. And that's where philanthropy can be effective and boost the efforts that they are undertaking and to lead to development. So treat the governments as partners because they own the development efforts.
Thank you very much. Now, we have 2 minutes left, has just been flagged to me. I want to throw a question at you, Murray, if I can. And it links into this morning's conversation, where Sudesh was talking about time. And these things, systemic change takes time. It's not just there's no magic wand or silver bullet that's going to work. How do we balance that with invariably shorter-term visions of change required by governments? And also the one question we had a conversation with before we came in is that another word that was used very early on today was trust. And we live in an environment where trust of politicians and governments is probably low. And if I was in government shoes, I know I couldn't commission services or direct money based on trust. So how strong a role does that still really have within engaging with the government?
Okay, big question. I'll start with the trust piece because for me that's one of the other pieces that makes working in this sphere for the British Council very interesting. So the British Council is the UK government's cultural relations organisation, so we trade in trust. That's what we've been doing for a long time. And I joined the British Council about 3 years ago. It was very clear to me quite quickly that there was a huge opportunity to do an awful lot in the social enterprise arena globally because of that, because the trust piece is just such a big part of it in terms of making things happen. But I also think that we started a conversation this morning, and I'm not sure how much it was picked up in other sessions. It was picked up to some extent in the impact assessment one, that there is a whole piece around measurement and the types of metrics or what we mean by evaluation that I think is going to really take on a life of its own in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think the trust piece and the social capital piece and all of that is going to be very significant. So one of the opportunities I think we have in terms of engaging with government is to be quite bold about how we put that to government around metrics and what we mean by metrics. On the short-term, long-term piece, I'm not sure that I have a very clear answer to that. I think it's a judgment call depending on the particular programs that you're running or the markets that you're operating in. There's always going to be a sense of trade-offs, and in terms of the programs that we're running, there are some things that are certainly much longer term in terms of their aspirations. And the job is just to convince the people that you need to be on board of that longer term opportunity, and to deliver enough in the short term that people are convinced that that's the right general direction to go in.
Lovely, thank you. Now we are out of time, so unless anybody has anything particular they wish to throw in, no. Just for me to summarise, just going back to Doug's comments from this morning, when you're thinking about engaging governments, I think it's too easy to say, I can't do that, it's too hard. I think it's our obligation and our responsibility to engage, irrespective of the fact that we might find it frustrating or we can't necessarily see the the connection to our day jobs. I think they will embrace urgency as long as you're talking the right language and you're talking about areas of shared mutual benefit. I think they can move with pace that you would be genuinely surprised at. And I think that we shouldn't kid ourselves that we cannot drive systematic change without engaging government. So I'd like to thank, I'd like you to please thank our three panelists. I would very much like to thank you all for your questions. I'm sure we are open to more questions offline at the drinks event. And I would now like to hand over to Simon, I believe.